Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Emily, do you remember the DARE program?
Of course I do. I was actually actively involved in the DARE program, thanks to being scared out of my mind by the propaganda against drugs in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. I remember them coming to the classroom at some point and talking us through, all the scary stuff that could happen if you were to consume anything. This was the era of Nancy Reagan and the era of the war on drugs. And I want to talk a little bit today about the war on drugs and how it still obviously plays a significant part in the operations of the federal government and some recent headlines around that.
Let's dig in.
All right. So the recent headline that I saw was there is a Senate committee that voted to let people who've used marijuana work for the CIA, the NSA, and other intelligence agencies. And they voted for this, and it's now attached to the Intelligence Authorization Act, which still has to get, voted on, but it's attached, right? And that's, pretty much how committees work. Things go through committee. If they're approved, they get attached to other things, and then those things pass or don't pass, or maybe sometimes it gets pulled. I thought this was pretty interesting because, the CIA, the NSA, any of our intelligence agencies have had a long history of, drug policy and asking potential candidates about their drug usage and essentially invalidating candidates right out of the gate for any past usage of anything, particularly Schedule I substances like cannabis. So this is, I think, good news. And, this is very much in line with the Amazon problem, which is, Amazon can't get enough people that are not testing positive for having consumed cannabis. And so, they're trying to change policy at the federal government level. This is the same idea. It's the federal government. And I think this is ultimately like a significant national security issue if they don't let smart people come in because of past cannabis use.
We are living in a really interesting time with this government in terms of the decisions that are being made. I mean, not long ago, we saw the White House was saying that they were going to, really limit access for folks to work for the Biden administration in the White House who had a past of having consumed cannabis. And that was a really interesting and disappointing thing. And the first thing I tweeted was like, well, now they're not going to be getting the best and brightest employees working for them. So, the way I think about it is we invest in people. And so if the government's not getting the best people, it makes me hard as a taxpayer to keep investing into that infrastructure. But I think the CIA, clearly, I like to think they do their homework. In fact, I know they do because I do have a friend who is on that side of things. And, while I don't know almost anything about what she does, I know that it's a very rigorous process to become employed there. And I also know that it's stressful and there's a lot to think about. And, in the problems I'm solving in the day-to-day, while they can feel immense and overwhelming, I can only imagine what folks working in the Central Intelligence Agency are feeling. And so having access to cannabis and something maybe that they're deeming as acceptable versus so many other things, maybe they're seeing the benefit to it in doing the work. So I'm excited by this, seeing it as a rational decision.
Yeah, it's almost like the government, their hand is forced. Even if people don't agree with legal cannabis, they know they need the right people in those roles. And so they have to loosen these restrictions. Now, the downside is, as far as I can understand it, it looks like it's for past use only, not for current use, which, is a whole nother problem. Certainly, if you're in a legal market, you should be able to consume, like you can consume alcohol if you're of age. But I don't think that this covers that portion yet, but it is, a starting point. And I think it's got to expand the candidate pool significantly for the intelligence agencies. Otherwise, I think the committee would have never said yes on this.
No, I agree. Yeah, and it is for past use, but at least I think, again, there's an acknowledgement that people who are high performers, high intelligence, do consume cannabis, and so you don't want to lose that talent pool.
That's right. And then even beyond national security for the federal government, there's issues around like supply chain right now, right? And there was an article not too long ago talking about truck drivers, and the number one reason that truck drivers are losing licenses is for testing positive on drug tests, and cannabis is the largest reported violation there. And just in 2021, 31,085 positive drug tests occurred for truck drivers. And there's a whole online database that they've created over the last couple of years to track this across any drug. And so the data's out there. And that's about 1% of the drivers out there. And in this world where we all struggle with, it's unbelievable that, we're so far into this pandemic, but the supply chain continues to be an issue. This is serious. And what's really interesting is that Pete Buttigieg is now the Secretary of Transportation. And I believe, I don't remember the senator's name, but someone, reached out saying we need to change this policy because of, this issue that's happening and obviously supply chain challenges. And I don't think anything's happened as of yet. And Pete Buttigieg actually campaigned on cannabis legalization, was one of his items. And I was looking it up, and he had his plan A, which would be just to work with lawmakers and get it passed, which of course, would never work, as we probably all know. So he had a plan B, which I thought was ridiculous, where he said he would take Air Force One, should he be elected president, and fly around the country visiting lawmakers' hometowns to convince voters to push for legalization, which also is pretty ridiculous. But I love the idea of him just like saying, we're getting on this plane, we're going to go to this town, showing up and like legalize weed, and then like flying away, right? Like it's just, it's a good plan. I don't know if it would have worked, but I bring it up because he's in the position to make change there now, and he campaigned on this, right? And we still haven't seen it. And I know it's one, small piece, but again, this is one of many, right? So people can go into the intelligence agencies, people can drive trucks, it's just things that if you live in these markets, you're so limited.
You're so limited. And let's face it, if you're a truck driver, you're kind of putting your body through a lot of tests. And there's a lot of things that go on with that, like sleep challenges, body pain, all of the things that cannabis could be really helpful for and would far less impair actual motor skills when you're not actively using it. So I don't know. It would be great to see some change. I'm just like thinking of that Flaming Lips song with Waiting for Superman, and it's like flying around. Oh man.
Yeah. If only he was elected, we could have seen that happen. But the last agency, as I was doing a bit of research, the EPA, some time ago, reported that they reminded their workers that they're prohibited from using marijuana or directly investing in the industry, which I thought was interesting. And I think that is the case for a lot of these federal agencies. So not only is it usage, but it's actual investment. And, we talk a lot about investing in this podcast, and just that very idea that you can't invest. I mean, it's already hard enough to invest, right? As everybody knows, it's like so tough. Even as a retail trader, you have to jump through hoops sometimes. And then if you work for the EPA and like now they're like, hey, don't invest, we can't abide by that. It's pretty ridiculous. So it is good to see the Senate committee voting yes towards, intelligence, but obviously intelligence, that's national security. I would argue that trucks and supply chain, has significant economic impact, and that needs to be like taken seriously by Buttigieg, and hopefully he is. And then, we'll get to the EPA eventually.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I started my district-wide recycling program when I was in high school. So they're missing out on this talent as a cannabis investor. But, I love that it's like the judgment calls of like when you realize what could make your car insurance go up if you pick a certain color or you got divorced. But like now they're making judgment calls about your investment choices. You can't support the EPA. But
you imagine you're interviewing and they're like, can you please show us your portfolio of investments? And they're criticizing it. Like, oh, you were in AMC? Interesting. So
they're like, PSDN, what is this?
Yeah, PSDN's on a list, I'm sure, at the EPA list, target number one.
At the EPA.
at the EPA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of government, there's some more government news that came out last week, and it's around the DEA, so everyone's favorite association or agency. And in 2021, their cannabis arrests increased, or seizures increased. They seized over 5.5 million plants. So they said that they took 750,000 pounds, up from 265,000 pounds. So that's pretty significant, to increase in this world where, things are legal and, maybe enforcement at that level shouldn't be as prioritized. Now, this article, which I believe was on Marijuana Moment, doesn't mention exactly who is getting arrested. I was really curious. Is this legal license holders and legal markets? But I didn't see any mention of anybody in particular. So maybe not. Maybe it's illicit. But there's a big question on, what penalties they'll get.
Yeah, I think they purposefully were not addressing that per se, but we do know there was a lot of illicit cannabis moved around the country last year, probably a record amount. So maybe that's what resulted in a record seizures of it. And I know we talk a lot about it on the pod here, that the illicit market is such a formidable competitor to the legal market. So I guess the question for us to all think about as an industry is, how do we want this to be dealt with by the regulators? Do we want it to be in the form of arrests? Probably not. And so what are the ways that we can try to encourage people to participate? The way I think about it is how do we get people to encourage in the legal regulated market where they pay taxes and fees and support the infrastructure that's being built around this rather than competing? And, this has been an issue in the past, and we've figured out ways around it, but putting people in jail has not been a great use of our time and resources. So I think we have to get more refined and nuanced in how we approach it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that kind of aligns with another thing I wanted to mention from the federal government. And this was last month, and we didn't get a chance to really talk about it, but Attorney General Garland, he reconfirmed their hands-off approach towards federal prosecution, basically not going as far as bringing back the Cole memo or saying, hey, we're going to have some sort of memo that will guide us, but kind of verbally offering that up and saying, yeah, this is really not a priority for us at this point, which is a long way away from, where we were with Sessions. If we remember, it was right after California legalized. I think that next day or the day after that, Sessions, rescinded the memo, and we didn't know what was going to happen in that context. And I think it could have been a lot worse than it ended up being, but it's still, we're in this weird gray area like always, but we don't even have the Cole memo to guide us. So I'm surprised in some ways that Garland hasn't reintroduced it or reintroduced something, put something on paper instead of just kind of verbally confirming that it's not a priority, especially given the Biden administration and some of the stuff like you mentioned at the top of the podcast about their hiring practices around cannabis. In some ways, I guess I'm not surprised, but at least it's good that he's acknowledging it. So do you think that this is going to be, is this a precursor to this kind of brick by brick approach, right? So we see this committee vote go through, maybe we see Department of Transportation make some changes. Maybe we see something from the Attorney General around this. Is this our path forward? Given all the headlines out there, Democrats' glimmer of hope for the midterm elections, I see, what are we looking for? Is this I guess it's just one of many paths, right? And maybe it's a path that ends up actually being the way we get there.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a pretty quiet summer. We live in a world of short attention span theater, and I think the politicians are going to hold everything hostage until they think they can get the most out of it right before people go to the ballots. And so that's my personal take, but a lot of us will keep doing the work in the background while this is going on. But if I think it's going to get done, I think it is through a brick by brick approach, because we saw the wholesale approach has just completely stalled everything. In fact, I think it's stalled the brick by brick. So we just have to get back to the foundational building, keep going state by state. And then, I even think about what we were just talking about with the CIA. I think Amazon and those organizations gave them a blueprint to work with in terms of thinking about how to bring this along. So private industry, I do think, will be a big trendsetter in how we navigate this whole issue.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.